Hey kids. So a few people have asked if I'd be willing to share the story about how my husband and I found each other. I think it's really important, obviously, with everything I talk about on this channel, to help people, particularly, kind of the best people, find each other and form stable relationships and have families and things like that. I think it's one of the keys toward saving the West and saving civilization. So I want to help with that in any possible way that I can. And Together agrees with that as well. Unfortunately, I mean, we talked it over, and I'm not sure that there's a whole lot from the story of just kind of our meet cute or whatever that would apply to a broad section of people. There's kind of just typical kind of quirks and things that are unique to our situation that I don't really think would extrapolate well lessons for other people. That said, there are a couple of points in there that I think are worth highlighting for people. So I'm happy to share a little bit of the story and then kind of pull out what I think might be useful. What I think is more interesting and what I've been planning on talking about is kind of the approach that I took in looking for him and the approach that he took in looking for me. And so this will basically be a three-part series. The first one here, I'm just going to cover basics of how we met and what I think is useful out of that for people. And then part two will be husband hunting 101, and part three will be wife hunting 101. And before I record, or when I record husband hunting 101, I'm not going to look at any of my husband's answers for wife hunting, so it'll be interesting to see where we sort of overlap and where we differ in our approach. I expect us to overlap a good bit because we usually do, but I also know there'll be some differences because, hey, men and women are different. So basically the story is really short. My husband and I met in college. We met in a club in college. That club is sort of oriented around a belief system, probably most comparable to like a serious religion for most people. And this was the first meeting of the club for the year. And I believe I was already in the room, and my husband, not then husband, guy I'd never met before, came into the room, and he was carrying onion rings, and I really love onion rings. So I was like, ooh, onion rings, and I honestly do not remember from that meeting what he looked like or anything like that. I just remember onion rings. And he, scoped out the room like a college guy likes to do, and saw me and said to himself, like, well, she's cute, but she's short and she has long hair, which are both bad for sex. So I think you got a pretty classic, hilariously classic male-female split there, where I was like, ooh, resources, and he was like, sex. So yeah, kind of typical. Yeah, so pretty much we got together right away after that and just kind of stuck it out ever since. So like I said, not a lot to glean from that story. I do think there are a couple of things that are worth highlighting. So one big one is, like I already mentioned, we met in an environment that was oriented around a belief system, core beliefs, not, like a hiking club, or we both like cars, which, also true, but this like I said, most comparable to a religion, or a religion that people take fairly seriously. So that made things a lot easier, and I think that is a really good idea, particularly if you have strong beliefs. If you don't have strong beliefs, I kind of suggest maybe you find some before you look for a person, because it's hard to find a good person for yourself if you don't sort of know who yourself is and what your key values are. And I mean, like I said, really fundamental stuff, right? Like, what do you think virtue is? What do you think the purpose of life is? That kind of thing. Which, and sometimes it's similar to politics. I think it's really trendy nowadays to say, like, you shouldn't date someone based on politics or not date them based on politics. I always thought that was kind of ridiculous. It depends on the environment, kind of the social and political environment of the day, how much difference there is between political parties, or how significant political differences are. But certainly they're getting more and more significant. And there's something very fundamentally different in the worldview of a person who's, sort of a typical right wing conservative and someone who's a socialist. I can't see how that would possibly make sense, and I'm constantly seeing people trying to make it make sense. And mostly they just do it by not talking about certain things that are pretty core. And you might be able to pull that off for a long time, but once you start to have kids, it's going to be more of a problem because you're going to be trying to orient them in the world. And, if you guys have too divergent of views on how to orient the children in the world, you're going to end up at the very least fighting a lot, if not separating. And then the kids, it still doesn't solve the problem from the perspective of how the kids are raised. So that would be number one tip, is try to meet someone in an environment that says something that kind of filters out people based on beliefs and values. The other big part was that we did meet at college. This one's a little tough for me because I'm anti-college in a big sense. Even before I went into college, my sort of dream ideal world, I would not have gone to college, and I've always really admired people who carve a path without going. That said, for what I wanted to pursue as a career, it was not 100% necessary, but it was definitely a good idea. Plus I had, kind of this intellectual curiosity that I wanted to satisfy. I honestly have a hard time recommending, at least for people of a certain level of intelligence, certainly if you're genius IQ or higher, I don't know what to tell you except go to college. In terms of finding a partner, I have many, many friends, very intelligent, very high quality people, no problem getting dates, right? Fairly alpha dudes, and stuff like that, who didn't settle down in college, and it's kind of hopeless for them now. It's really hard for them to find, women who are sufficiently intelligent. I know fewer women who didn't settle down. There are relatively few who didn't have exactly the same problem. And actually a lot of them end up kind of just going back to the university that they went to, or alums of that university, to try and find mates. I think another piece of it is, if you are young and you're going into college now and you're thinking, part of what I'm trying to get is my MRS degree, or MR or whatever, trying to get married, trying to find a partner. Think about the values of that university, because that kind of tying back to the belief system thing. A lot of schools are just schools, right? They're just like degree machines. They're just churning people out. Other schools have very strong values associated with them, either crazy or not so crazy. I definitely went to a school that has a traditional approach. So I wouldn't call it conservative. Fundamentally, I would still call the school liberal, but it is very academics focused, and it's the most traditional university I think you can find, in a classic sense, in the United States, and that made a big difference. It made a big difference in finding friends. So it's not just about finding spouses; it's the people that you're still connected with, years and years later, who form sort of the core of your social circle, and there are a handful of schools that I think kind of operate in a similar way. Just finding something that reflects your values, putting yourself somewhere that reflects your values so that you're around other people who share those values, makes it much, much, much easier to look for someone. So the final lesson I can pull out of the story of how my husband and I met is, I think there's a challenge with dating, again, like outside of college. In college, people spend an awful lot of time together, and it's not in a romantic context. It's very, very difficult in the outside world and the dating world to get the kind of exposure to another person that you get in college. For instance, if they live in the same dorm as you, you might spend, days, weeks, like so many hours together with this person. In my case, with my husband, I think we had spent at least 24 hours, like actually 24 hours total in each other's company before I even started to be romantically interested in him. And I've always wondered, how is that supposed to happen in a dating environment? Because, it's pretty rare for someone to even go on more than one date if they don't kind of feel it at the beginning. And granted, it's a little different because that's kind of what you're looking for. But, I could see two people who are actually very compatible going on a date and just hitting on like all the wrong topics and not having a good time, and then assuming that means we're not a good fit after spending 2 hours together. Whereas maybe if you had spent, the kind of time that Together and I spent together, you might actually realize, oh, hey, we're a really good fit, and, in all the areas that count. I think there are strategies people can employ to sort of date more effectively, but I am very skeptical of the whole concept of dating the way that we do it as a result of this. I don't see how people really get to know each other in that sort of way. So I guess again, I kind of come back to, go to college and spend a lot of time with people. If, that's not an option for you, or this is something, you're later in life trying to redo things. Maybe the story's not exactly for you, but, one thing that I've heard that's kind of successful is like, again, joining groups around activities, or if you, Bible study, things like that, where, there's not a romantic assumption about the situation, and you can just spend time with people, get to know them, spend a couple hours week after week after week, and, before you move on to that romantic stage. That is pretty much the story and the lessons I think can be learned from it. So in the next video, I will give you some more details about my side of the story, and then follow up later with my husband's side of the story. So